Does anyone else ever wonder what the actual purpose of competitive play in Overwatch is? I mean, sure, we can approach this with a very caveman-like attitude and say if there's a ladder, it is meant to be climbed. But am I the only one who just doesn't get that same satisfaction from ranking up anymore? Every game I win brings me closer and closer to a rank that becomes increasingly more restrictive with the amount of heroes I can play without immediately throwing. And all that for what? A shiny badge I get to flex with? Real gamers don't care about the rank, what they really care about is the challenge. So it's time to take on my biggest challenge yet and see if I can surpass my limits and survive in what is arguably the worst rank in Overwatch while playing my absolute worst role. But I wouldn't be as much of a gamer as I claim to be without our sponsor for today, Opera GX. Being the first browser for gamers, you can be certain that Opera GX was tailor-made with features that actually matter to people like you and me. The GX Corner is your place to get your day started with tons of information regarding all things gaming. The release calendar is going to keep you up to date on which games come in knocking, and if you're a cheapskate like me, you'll love to be able to see which games are currently available for free on any given platform. But of course, our tour isn't over yet. Opera GX is fully set up to keep all of your favorite services at your fingertips ready to use. Discord integration definitely goes without saying in the year 2021, but of course you can also make use of the GX Player, which not only allows you to stream music from YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music, but they also automatically pause the stream when you start playing audio in one of your other tabs. Granted, I don't use any of these streaming services because I'm fairly old-fashioned with a heavy emphasis on old, but one thing I absolutely use is GX Control. Longtime viewers of the channel know that my internet connection can be described as spotty at best, so being able to tell Opera GX to only use a certain amount of my available bandwidth is very useful. And if you're on a RAM or CPU budget, you can hard limit all these things as well to make sure you never drop frames when it really matters. And of course, this wouldn't be a browser for gamers if you weren't able to customize the ever-living crap out of it. Themes, wallpapers, colors, animations, between the technical customization as well as the design customization, it was never easier to truly make your browser your own. And the best thing, it's absolutely free. So what are you waiting for? Get yourself Opera GX and make it your own by following my link in the description below. Massive shout out and big thanks to Opera GX for sponsoring this video and supporting my channel. And now, on to our standard programming. Now, if it feels to you as though you don't get to watch me play DPS very often, that's because you don't. I have a tendency of getting bored real fast whenever I play that role, and let's just say that 9-minute queue times at 4 PM on a Saturday while using priority passes isn't exactly what I would call a fun time. But unfortunately, this is the only way I get to legitimately play in Platinum without smurfing. Don't be mistaken, if you think that Birdie and I are about to stomp this lobby, then you must have never seen us play DPS. The enemy team, on the other hand, did feature a few Smurf accounts, which the two of us would have to contest. So even though we are in a low SR match, that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And since I haven't played in Platinum since Season 2, I decided to kick our defense off in the exact same way I did all these years ago. DLC hero or not, the good old 2016 trap worked like a charm, and while I would have loved to start the game off with an elimination, at least our Hammond didn't let his supports get any ultimate charge off the damage I dealt. You can tell by the way I'm positioning myself that I'm definitely taking this match very seriously. Playing around cover is a good habit to have on any role you play, but especially on Zenyatta, and only because the enemy Widowmaker missed her first shot does not mean she's not dangerous. And Jammer the Widow Smurf immediately decided to prove that by taking out those who dare to not respect her presence. We had to temporarily forsake the high ground when her jump shots became increasingly aggressive thanks to the support of her Hammond's diving maneuver. It was obvious that Jammer did not approach this game with the amount of caution that I put on display, which allowed me to calculate the perfect angle by which my explosives can eliminate her. And with the enemy sniper taken care of, it was time to reclaim the high ground and counter-dive the Hammond who was trying to stop my diva from getting into her mech. Playing DPS like the supports and playing Zenyatta like a flanker seem to be habits I simply cannot shed. For the time being, I felt validated in my supportive play securing the safety of my teammates, but there would be a time where playing defensively is not going to be enough. Somebody who could stand to play a bit more defensively was our Hammond though. Of course we appreciated him stalling out the card, but he could have at least perished in a more convenient location so that our Mercy does not have to put herself in mortal danger to bring him back. Fool me once and all the rest of it, because the way that our Hammond decided to thank our Mercy was by immediately heart-inting to the enemy Widowmaker just to get eliminated once more. I guess some things never change no matter the rank, huh? The enemies began gaining ground on us after getting rid of our Hammond, and I tried to turn the tide with my Riptire. However, it was foolish of me to expect that I could land that ultimate on a DPS Smurf. Things began to properly fall apart for us when the red team decided to respond to my ultimate with a bunch of ultimates of their own, and unfortunately, not everybody had a convenient sprint ability that allowed us to retreat. Carbine had since returned from his initial double feed, but rather than trying to contest the card, he figured that that continuing to focus the Smurf duo was the better course of action. It isn't often that I see Hammond players run away from Widowmakers, but I really had to wonder what the heck he was doing to continue getting eliminated by her when his character was designed to make her life difficult. Either way, our defense had completely fallen apart at that point. The red team had us beaten not only through superior use of ultimates, but also just flat out better basic plays. And they had every intention of keeping up the pace because many of us were trying to recontest the card, which in hindsight ended up being a futile attempt. I can definitely see why Carbine was so intent on focusing Jammer. She was not only tearing through our lineup, but also continued to deny every single one of my ultimates. Blindly spamming down choke points is fun and all, but at some point you do start to grab the occasional elimination. Thankfully, the enemy Genji came to provide exactly that, getting juggled and wombo comboed by Birdie and me. The opposing Winston player, Mayebs, did not find that funny at all though, and after we had wasted our cooldowns to eliminate his Genji, figured he could teach us a lesson by zapping us back to our spawn. Carbine finally gave up his futile attempt at spawn camping Jammer, returning to his card stalling duties, which have proven to at least give us a fighting chance. And one thing that became very apparent to me was that Hammond isn't just completely overpowered in the hands of Grandmaster players who really know how to make use of his overtuned kit, but Plats in particular seemed to have a really hard time getting him off the card. It was that kind of distraction our diva needed to come flying in with an ultimate to officially lead our comeback. Teammates of ours came pouring out of every nook and cranny on the map to make use of that opening pick provided by Terry. The red team had bitten off more than they could chew, and at last we stopped the card from moving. Since Birdie was too busy one-tricking the worst DPS hero in the game, and I obviously wasn't doing anything useful on Junkrat anymore, I took it upon myself to swap to a character that can save our supports from the enemy dive. Hitscan is not exactly my forte. I always said that if I wanted to play a point-and-click adventure, I'd go and download CSGO Overwatch, but McCree was the best pick in my eyes at the time, and as such, here we are whiffing shots in an attempt of scaring the enemy flankers off my teammates. It is worth pointing out though that our resident flanker Carbine was not content with simply holding onto the payload. It really felt like he was trying to establish the Smurf differential in this game, boldly charging into the enemy spawn to strip more time off the clock by imprisoning the attackers. But no king rules forever, my son, and it should come to absolutely nobody's surprise that his aggressive style of tanking was eventually going to cost him his head. Much like a single elimination was all we needed for our comeback, the enemy team used the sudden demise of Carbine to pick us apart before I could even get back in position. The rest of my team also had a really hard time getting the attackers off our high ground, and rather than securing our position, we were left no choice but to forsake it. Birdie in particular was having a really hard time because while he was enjoying the support of our Mercy, it still was not enough to stop him from dying almost immediately after having been resurrected. Being a low mobility Andy, you can be certain that I was absolutely sick and tired of all these kids blinking, leaping, zipping, and running around me. If I don't get to do any of these things, then neither do they, and the best way to achieve that was by sending them back to spawn. I have to admit that at times it becomes a bit challenging to see who is currently having the upper hand. There's a lot of back and forth going on between our teams, which is definitely a good sign as far as a match of Overwatch is concerned, but gives me a really hard time choosing the right background music. Don't bother getting used to the tunes of heroism because the red team was not losing any time and came back with a vengeance. Vengeance in form of a nano blade to which we simply had no good response. The second point was lost as well, but I had good faith in our ability to hold the red team off for good this time. Don't forget that we are only struggling whenever Carbine decides to go on a flanking adventure, and the last point on Dorado does not actually allow for a lot of that to happen. All we had to do was stabilize our position one last time to be able to make use of our spawn advantage. However, the red team was giving us a lot of trouble when it came to our attempts of regrouping. The clock was ticking down, and you know things are bad when your Mercy has to stop pulling at the Glock. The attackers definitely knew how to ride a wave, meaning we had to find a way to kick them off the board. Birdie made the switch from Prey to Hunter, turning around as soon as our Mercy arrived to attempt to chase down the opposing Mercy. I do have to cut him some slack here because he was playing at 220 ping at the time of recording, but handicap aside, he eventually secured the kill. The enemy Genji was not a big fan of that, and despite the fact that his team was bleeding out, decided to pull out the weep stick in an attempt at saving the fight. Of course, every Genji player would prefer not to have to use half of their ultimate on a tank, but alas, Carbine was eliminated. Simultaneously, I was finally allowed to leave my spawn room after having been camped for what felt like 10,000 years just to begin my return by scaring the enemy tracer into recalling through a minefield. Scare tactics were really the best thing I could provide at the time, as I whiffed every but one bullet on the enemy Ana. I had most assuredly lost my edge by that point in the game, struggling to find my groove on a hit scan hero as I finished my janitor duties with the elimination of the enemy Genji, who was still under the impression that he could solo carry the card to the finish line. It took us way more effort than it realistically had any right to, but we finally arrived in last fight territory, and we were in surprisingly good shape. After having forced the opposition to waste some ultimates on a futile push, we had many more to spare to make sure that we would be the ones to come out victorious. If the red team was mechanically superior, then our best chance to win was by controlling the battlefield. Attackers are bound to get anxious when overtime approaches, so we could get big value out of zoning them with our ultimates. Baptiste's Matrix is one of the most reliable zoning tools in the game, and while it did make the enemy team second guess their positioning, my Deadeye was meant to take advantage of the confusion by eliminating whoever tries to push forward anyway. We had opened this fight up with a whopping 3 eliminations. Whoever survived was surely in panic mode now, and the best thing they could achieve was stalling out the inevitable. You would never assume that I ranked higher than Platinum on any of my roles of my performance in this match, but our defense had shown me something very important. The whole reason I decided to queue for DPS is because it puts me in a rank that is low enough for me to be able to forget that something like a meta exists. And while McCree was undeniably a good choice in response to the enemies, it wasn't what I was comfortable playing. If we want to beat the red team's distance on the payload, then I'd have to deliver a far stronger DPS performance, meaning it is time for me to return to my roots as a projectile specialist. Now, when I say projectile specialist, really that's just a fancy way of saying one trick. While you wouldn't be wrong to call me up for Zenyatta being my only strong pick, some skill sets transfer more easily than others. Let's just say that when I spent my whole time leading projectiles, it takes some time to get used to instant hit registration. And time was a luxury we didn't have. In games like these where both parties are equally matched, it is important to resort to your comfort picks that allow you to bring your best performance. So as much as I might not be known for my Genji play, my Zenyatta experience should allow me to land more shuriken than I was landing bullets. Fittingly enough, I'd be facing off against Hayden on Hanzo, who was previously also playing Genji. I suppose that sort of positioning might be considered creative in these ranks, but back in Masters I haven't seen anyone stand there in ages, because they usually get popped at a spawn. Naturally, a danger that never imposes its implied threat might as well be no danger at all. Hayden may have rained arrows down on us, but none of them actually dealt any damage, so as soon as my shurikens connected with his face, he decided to back out. The real problem was, once again, his DPS counterpart Jammer. The impact that a mercy-pocketed hitscan Smurf can have on a low SR game is definitely not to be underestimated. Of course, we could have done a lot of things better in the way we were approaching our offense, from training our trigger finger to stopping the constant flanking. But either way, Jammer would continue to make their presence known in very aggressive fashion. And what Jammer could not eliminate, Hayden made an effort to mop up. At this point, he could really make use of the fact that we were very focused on trying not to get sniped from the other side, though eventually I decided to contest him. I definitely was not bold enough to try and take on Jammer and his belt attachment all on my own, but a Platinum Hanzo was something I felt confident in being able to handle. A perfectly timed deflect allowed me to confirm the elimination, but of course I had to do my due diligence and camp the body for the inevitable res. The opposing Mercy refused to take the L in that situation, popping her wings and going for the resurrection right in front of my face. That slight moment of hesitation before I pulled my blade allowed her to flee into the skybox, but fine, if I can't reach her, I'm just gonna go and slice up literally everybody else. Even with my limited amount of Genji hours, I was feeling much more in my element. I wouldn't forget my supportive playstyle, of course, but in this case, we needed to stack up eliminations to be able to break past the choke points. And that's exactly what we did. We carefully advanced further and further while taking out the remaining defenders with almost surgical precision. There was no way for the red team to stage a cohesive attempt at recontesting unless we make a mistake. Now, Birdie up until that point had been a bit of a non-factor in this game. I know he loves to blame his ping for his lackluster performance, but I've definitely seen the correlation between him playing Soldier and him making incredibly stupid game sense-based decisions. I highlight that just to illustrate how much of the DPS burden was on my shoulders at that point. Though with that said, obviously I wasn't perfect either, and when I found myself stranded between a rock and a hard place, it was only thanks to Birdie's elimination granting me a dash reset that I survived. We're going to ignore the fact that he was the one that made the call to chase Baptiste in the first place, because that doesn't fit my narrative. Anyway, my Zarya and I must have absolutely been on the same page when we began chasing down the remaining defenders. Mercy-pocketed anythings are about the most obnoxious thing in the universe, so I very much approved of them being the recipient of a graviton surge. Our chase was going so well that I made an attempt of renegotiating the recently swapped Hayden back into their spawn, but much like their Mercy refused to leave Jammer alone, their Moira did the same thing here, which eventually led to my demise. Birdie had since returned to finish what I started, and with the rest of our team escorting the objective and him holding onto the high ground, our chances to keep the ball rolling were still there. Well, that was until a new challenger appeared that could benefit from a pocket healer. This was as far from a gentleman's duel as one can imagine, and while all of us can collectively sigh in frustration over the fact that Birdie refused to disengage a fight he obviously could not win, whatever the case may be, we just lost our advantage. Without Birdie controlling the high ground, our tanks would find themselves overwhelmed in no time at all. Jammer's right-click spam was already doing a number on my Reinhardt's barrier, but an incoming charge Deadeye combo was ultimately what sealed the deal. The red team had successfully stopped the payload, and with that began the process of shattering our hopes for victory. Excuse me, what? Who the heck decided to write that garbage into the script? We're in Platinum, for crying out loud. We wouldn't know if we're doing poorly if you shouted it in our faces. So with an unwarranted amount of confidence, we pushed the red team back simply by utilizing our overblown egos. Terry, the gold-ranked Reinhardt legend, was leading the charge even in the face of overwhelming damage piercing his barrier. But who needs barriers anyway when the enemies lay flat on the floor? You might not assume that I'm the type of person to solo blade a mercy, but every support knows that DPS players aren't half as dangerous as they seem to be without a pocket. I suppose being able to get a few slashes in on their Hammond was a nice bonus, but you and I both know that I was trying to send a message here. The enemies had to feed themselves into the grinder just in a desperate attempt of stalling out the objective. Their last possible win condition was the Hammond's minefield, but at that point even that wasn't enough to turn the tide. The defenders had awoken the beast and now they had to deal with our fangs. While I was still trying to live up to average 2900 gameplay, Terry was punching way above his weight class by engaging in an extended stagger strategy that fooled the enemy Hammond into believing they could disengage. Things were going incredibly well for us, so you know that Birdie couldn't help himself and find a way to overextend and be the first one dead once more. Needless to say that all of us were hoping to keep up the pace all the way until the end, but I guess it will be boring if the defenders had just given up. And as much as my mechanics don't show it, my game sense was still that of a Masters player. It was more than obvious by the way that Farah was playing that they were trying to set up for a barrage, but I knew that they wouldn't try to go for it as long as I kept my deflect off cooldown. Between me playing the watchdog and Birdie poking them from the side, Hayden never found an opening to make use of that ultimate they've been sitting on for so long. Uncertainty breeds discomfort, and that discomfort was urging the defenders to try and end this fight once and for all. As if stung by a bee, everyone in the lobby was currently alive and had an ultimate available, aggressively smashed the Q button. The resulting color vomit made it difficult to see what was happening at the best of times, potentially causing mental damage at worst due to overexposure to flashing lights. But this game had gone on for far too long. We didn't come this far to now let them stall us into oblivion with their spawn advantage, so it is time to turn up the heat one last time. Yes, let's go, Birdie! Double DPS!
That is about how my games have been going.
It is incredible how much fun you can have when you start seeing a purpose on what you are doing. I have long since peaked as a support player, but in the DPS category, there is still a ton to learn for me. I was definitely right in having landed more shuriken than I did bullets, and I really wish that DPS queue times weren't so horrendously long so that I don't lose my motivation to get better. Unfortunately, things are just the way they are right now. I can be happy to find a match period, so as such, the best thing I can do is to enjoy the good games whenever they come around. But this is it for our story here today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, do let me know by dropping me a like on your way out. Consider subscribing if you want to see more, and definitely ring that bell icon to not miss out on my next upload. Big shout out as well to OPRA for sponsoring today's video. Don't forget to check them out through the link in the description below. Thank you everybody so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Peace.